When you think of outdoor environmental education, what do you see in your mind? Do you imagine kids trooping through the woods harassed by mosquitoes? Or maybe something idyllic like what I'm looking at now, getting ready for a group of high school students to visit me at Harvard Forest tomorrow. There is a light layer of snow between the trees that crunches while I walk around, putting up flagging tape on the trees that I want the students to study and measure. There isn't any kind of building within sight, and the only noise is me walking and the drip of icicles in the sun. But what if I told you this is also a possible landscape for environmental education? On today's episode of Schoolyard Scientists, we are taking you to the Big Apple. And no, not the one that is a roadside attraction on Route 2 West in Massachusetts, which is, of course, what you are all immediately thinking of first. Nope, I'm talking about New York City. We currently have a handful of schools in the 5 boroughs collecting data for our Buds, Leaves, and Global Warming project. But it all started off with the work of one teacher, Dr. Elisa Margarita of Brooklyn Technical High School. Claim to fame, with 5,966 students enrolled, it is the largest high school on the East Coast. It is also right across the street from Fort Greene Park in Brooklyn, where Dr. Margarita has been taking her students to collect phenology data for Harvard Forest since 2015.
I give an end of the year survey, and they all write how meaningful this is to get outside for mental health, and also just going from being tree blind to seeing trees all the time now.
Today we talk with Shira and Julia, 2 seniors at Brooklyn Tech who are environmental science majors. Side note, how cool is it that high schoolers get to focus on their interests like that while they're still in high school? Are you listening, Massachusetts? Anyway, Shira and Julia are environmental science majors who took AP Bio with Dr. Margarita last year and are here to tell us about their experience and what they've learned from the trees and about how climate change is affecting their neighborhoods in New York.
I want to continue doing this kind of hands-on research, like through college and also after college,
It showed like research is very big and it's not only one thing. So being able to do it in high school, I think opened up many different opportunities that I'd think about during college and after college.
This is Schoolyard Scientists, the podcast about how students and their teachers are actively contributing to our understanding of how climate change is affecting our neighborhoods in the Northeast and the entire East Coast. From the shores of Cape Cod to an urban park in Brooklyn, New York, students are tracking seasonal changes, monitoring for invasive species, and documenting our changing forests. I'm your host, Katherine Hinkle. Be prepared to be inspired and find out what the students are finding out and how we can all learn from going outside and really looking at what is going on around us.
My name is Julia. I go to Brooklyn Tech, really big school, but we're both in the environmental science major, so that's why we did this study. And then the park itself, Fort Greene Park, I would say it's like a medium-ish size for New York City. Like there's Prospect and Central, which are like huge. It's not that big, but there's definitely some like smaller ones, so it's like in between. And yeah, there's like a lot of like different fields with trees, a lot of just open grass, because it's a very like popular park. Like a lot of like people like take their kids there or whatever. So it's not just like all nature. There's also like a playground, basketball courts. But yeah, the part that we focused on was just grassy with trees.
I'm Shara Nasser. I'm also a senior in the environmental science major. So we did the study last year, years 2022 to 2023, I believe. And just like to go into more specifics about our site, I did the Northern Red Oak, and our site was on top of a slope. And so like one side, you'll be able to see like streets and sidewalks, and then you turn around and you'll be able to see like the tennis court or the playground on the other side. So like this shows like there's a lot of interaction between both people and animals in this urban site.
My tree was a pin oak. And mine was actually kind of like at like in Fort Greene Park was a big slope, and I guess Shira's was on top, but mine was at the bottom of the slope. And mine was in a pretty busy area. On one side of it, there was a thin like little like running path that is fairly popular. And then just like the end of just like the like wall, like the last wall of the park, like, was on the very edge of the park. And then on the other side, there was just like a normal walking path where, strollers, dogs, like everything you can imagine goes by. So it definitely gets a lot of like people and animals around it. And a lot of times we would notice like squirrels too. So it was definitely like a tree that interacted with a lot.
Very broadly, what did you like about doing the study?
I liked going back to the same tree. Like I feel like I kind of have like a connection to that tree now. I know it's so silly, but like I feel like, because I see Fort Greene Park every single day, and a lot of times I'll just go in it after school or whatever. And I see that tree, I'm like, whoa, like I like closely like examined and looked at this tree. Like I know how this tree like operates throughout the year. And I'm like, I feel like that's so interesting because in New York City, I'm not like going out and looking at trees and being like, how does this tree's leaves fall, And then also just getting to know the two people that I worked with. And I think that we just all worked so well together, and it was nice working with them.
Yeah. Just to piggyback off of that, I think giving the boots on the ground research experience was something definitely we would not be able to do outside of school or even outside of the major. And so like having the ability to like hone in and gain in observation skills, like Julia said, like very closely looking at our leaves or the buds. We're now able to like sometimes I'll like catch myself walking along the sidewalk and think, oh, I know that tree. And so yeah, it's like very like interactive outside of the study itself.
So let me explain a little bit about the Buds, Leaves, and Global Warming project that Shira and Julia are talking about. This is a project that was based off the research of Dr. John O'Keefe from Harvard Forest. He has been studying the seasonal change or phenology of woody species here at the forest for over 30 years by observing the timing of budburst in the spring and leaf drop in the fall. He has seen notable changes in the timing of seasonal change here in central Massachusetts during the time of that study. From the early 1990s until today, this has included colder Aprils and an extended growing season in the fall. For more on this, check out the links in the show notes. The students take on the same role as Dr. O'Keefe, but turn their attention to their own trees to notice when the leaves come out and when they fall, which gives them the growing season for their school year and tells us how long those trees are actively photosynthesizing and taking in carbon dioxide. The project was developed in 2004, 20 years ago, and has been shepherded by Dr. O'Keefe, Pamela Snow, my predecessor here at the schoolyard, and Dr. Emery Boos, another researcher here. Not to mention the literal thousands of students who have contributed their observations to our project in the last 2 decades.
Anyway, so, when we come in the fall, everything's still green, all the leaves are on the tree. And then, as we kept going, the leaves would turn orange and brown, sometimes even fall off. And there was a grading system. So the leaves were graded like 1 through 4. 1 was completely green. 2 was like, it's still mostly green, but it's turning brown. 3, it's almost fully brown. And then 4, it's like fully brown or it's just fallen off. And so, yeah, we had to keep track of that. And each group had different species of tree, and all the species acted very differently. Some went slower, some were faster, some, turned orange right away, And yeah, and then by the end of the fall, it was, it was basically winter, and everybody's like leaves had fallen off. And yeah, that was the fall part.
Yeah, and for the spring part, same basis. We all had 4 branches, and then we would number them. But since it's spring, we are now focusing on buds instead of leaf fall rate. And so again, a grading system was implemented, and we had C for closed, P for puffy, and O for open buds. And throughout the year, throughout the spring session, we would go out once a week, look at our buds and specifically our trees. And we do like both I think in fall and spring we step back from our tree and do an overall grading of the canopy itself. And yeah, I think that was our spring summary.
Awesome. So by having this kind of like this spring component and the fall component, what's the ultimate goal with looking at this?
I think to get like a full picture of how the tree like lives how the leaves on the tree like live their life from when they're dying and then when they're growing back, just get like a full picture of it. And also from the same tree, from the same species, because again, all the species like they not only fell but also grew at different rates.
Mm-hmm. And especially since we're an urban site, I feel like the effects of climate change were a little bit more detrimental to our trees, because I think talking about like growing season, we would have like longer growing seasons from compared to like other years. I think like when we started in 2015, we had like growing seasons of like 185-ish days, and then 2022 was like our highest that we've had.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So that question of like how, many days during the course of the year is the tree actually like, right, kind of growing leaves and photosynthesizing. Awesome. And so what I think is really unique and interesting, and Shira and Julia, you can chime in here. So we want to see the tree throughout the growing season. You guys were talking about like what is going on with its, kind of whole productive part of its year. But obviously the summertime when it's at its most kind of green and productive, if you will, you guys aren't there.
Mm.
And it might be different students, right? Like you guys collected a bunch of data this past spring, which is like in the database at Harvard Forest. And there's now a different group who is like looking at your trees. So it's a really interesting handoff and almost this, it's like a gift you're giving next year's cohort. What was that kind of like working with other students' data?
I think it was really fun. Like I feel like it like connected I like the past years of environmental science. And also we didn't really look at the other students' data until the very end. And like when like we had all our data. And it was just so interesting, like to see, these people who are now like graduated college or in their senior year, or whatever, like, at one point like they were doing the same thing as me. And then also just statistically to just see the differences, to see if our trees growing rate and especially our trees falling rate, if it stayed the same or sped up. And yeah, I like that.
Mm-hmm. And also like just it felt like we were part of like a generational impact in how we were studying trees and focusing on specific trees. And it just felt like we were part of this like bigger like solution towards like finding more research.
Yeah, and Shira, I loved what you jumped in with some specific numbers there, which was great to hear. So I know that, groups of students with Dr. Margarita have been studying these trees since 2015, 2016, which is an amazing kind of, we're, getting towards 10 years almost of data looking at these same trees. And you cited a couple of differences that you guys saw when you were looking at the data. And I would love to go back to that and make sure we give some space. So you mentioned the growing season had changed. What had you guys seen in the data change about the growing season?
So for Brooklyn Tech, the overall growing season for all the trees combined, I think there was like a very big dip in 2020, and it was like at an all-time low, near like 190. But then there's like a major increase in 2021, around like 2015 days, for the growing season. But like if you go in for more specifics, in this different trees, you'll be able to see like let's say like the Japanese pagoda, I think had like a very big dip in 2019. So when you go into more specifics, you'll see that different trees had lower peaks and lower heights. I mean higher heights than when it's all averaging to one.
Great, gotcha. And so why do you think it's important to think about the growing season when it, in relation to climate change and global warming?
Well, the growing season is going to get longer as climate change progresses because it's going to start getting hotter and sunnier like earlier in the year. And that's definitely reflected in our research. Like I think I'm looking at the same graph that Shai was looking at. The growing season in 2021 was for the Japanese pagoda was like over 220 days, along with a couple other trees too, not just the Japanese pagoda. And that's because it's just getting warmer earlier and probably also staying warmer till later. So that impacts the falling season because then they're going to fall later because they're not going to fall while it's still warm and sunny out.
So yeah, I mean, I guess what is so interesting, I think that gets to the heart of the study is that, right, like the story we talk about with climate change and global warming is like, okay, things are getting warmer, things are changing and reacting. And certainly this study is helping us understand, how seasons are changing and affected by global warming. But like what you guys were just talking about with like different tree species are going to respond differently. And that information is really helpful, like to kind of know which species kind of react in different ways and understand which ones, are maybe doing well or maybe aren't doing well in different climates. And, the results that you guys get in New York City, Brooklyn is going to be different than the students who we have studying this in Georgia or in Maine or like off the coast of Massachusetts. And all of these results are really, really helpful to giving us these hyper local responses.
Yeah, and then going back to the original question, like why it's important to focus in on the climate and growing seasons is like not only does it affect the trees, but it also affects the animals that depend on these trees. So like going back to the very beginning, we saw all these different animals interacting with our trees, let's say like birds, squirrels. And so if the growing season is larger, then these animals will also adapt to larger growing seasons because these trees are their habitat. And so it goes more to a global scale, both animals, people, and the trees itself.
So we talked a little bit about what we're seeing from the growing season from your study and how there has been an increase. Are there any other specific results from your studies that you guys would like to share? I know you guys each did some reports on your tree and looking at the data. So I would love to hear anything that you'd like to share that you concluded from the data and your analysis.
Well, from my study, I learned about my tree that it stays green for a while, but then once the leaves start turning orange, they turn pretty fast and then they're completely brown or they fall off. And I was wondering, like, oh, is this just for this like weird season or is this a pattern? So I looked at the data for the year before and it was the same thing. Like while the other trees were falling off, like the pin oak, it still had most of its leaves. And so it's interesting to see. And also it made me think maybe like that's a reason why it's so common in New York City because it stays green and spring looking for so long. There's a shorter season where it's dead.
I think some specifics would be like in April 2017, the values were fairly distributed, with every tree having at least like 5% of the buds open during the spring phenology. Most fell between like 40 and 60%. And then the later years, it was less distributed, and most of the trees had no buds open during April. So I feel like the differences were very noticeable when we were doing our data graphs.
What did you love about your trees? You spent so much time with them.
I love that my tree's species is all over New York City. Like I learned that fact that pin oak is extremely common. And I love that now, like whenever I see a pin oak on the street or in a park, and there's so many in parks, I know like how what their growing season is like and how like versatile these trees are. But then for my tree specifically, I don't know. I feel like it's such like a strong tree like in my heart because it's around so many people, so many dogs, squirrels, runners, like kids, doing whatever. And I feel like, it goes through a lot and I appreciate that.
Yeah, I mean, I loved my tree. It was super big, like I mentioned. And like during I think it was fall, like when it was falling the leaves, the colors were such a pretty like mix. And I think one thing I loved about our tree was like I think it was during the fall season, we actually found, it might have been in the spring. We found like a wasp nest, like the remains of a wasp nest under our tree. And I thought that was super cool. And it was like, it was very flaky and papery. I mean, you could see all the like hexagonal shapes on the inside. And I think Dr. Margarita also was there when we found it. And it was just like, it was huge. So that gave us like evidence that, okay, this tree is definitely healthy. And yeah, we found like all these lichens, moss on our tree.
So now that you're like a year out from doing your study, like what do kind of what are you taking away as the like, okay, yeah, this is what I got out of being in this program and participating in this study?
I would say what I'm taking away is the knowledge of how trees work. Obviously, as a kid, like that the leaves turn brown and they fall off and they're green again. But like now I know more like the process of that happening. And it's not just like, oh, the leaf appears, first there's a bud and then it opens and it's a leaf. So just the knowledge and also just the connectedness to environmental science for me, like that, like we started that project very towards the beginning of the school year. Anyway, so we started it like pretty towards the beginning of junior year, so I was very new to the major. And I feel like it really made me connect with the major, both like with the, 30 other people in it, but also just with like what the content is and like how it's about like real life that we see every day, like even if we don't like notice it, And it led me to being more interested in environmental science, because this was one of the first things that we did. And I was like, hey, like I want to continue doing this kind of hands-on research like through college and also after college.
Yeah, I think the Harvard Phenology study definitely opened many doors for me. Before I wasn't thinking about like doing more like on the ground research or even studying about trees. For me, it was more like, oh, I'd probably be like in the lab. But it showed like research is very big and it's not only one thing. So being able to do it in high school, I think opened up many like different opportunities that I'd think about during college and after college.
Wow, this has been such a delightful conversation, you guys. I've really appreciated your observations and insights. You guys are both so articulate and thoughtful. This really has been a delight. Dr. Margarita, I also just wanted to invite you in the same way. If there's anything maybe I forgot to ask or anything else you'd like to say about the study, please feel free to jump in.
I just love how the students really all, I give an end of the year survey and they all write how meaningful this is to get outside for mental health and also just going from being tree blind to seeing trees all the time now, and just the legacy of passing on this data and information, both passing it up to crowdsourcing it to Harvard Forest and the scientists up there, and also to the next generation of students that keep moving it forward. So it's just been a wonderful experience.
That is all for now from the schoolyard. Join us next time when we hear from another school and their results, and we'll see how they compare with what Julia, Shira, and their classmates found in Brooklyn. If you liked what you heard today, here are a few things you can do. If you're a teacher or school administrator and you want to get your students collecting data, join us. Find us at harvardforest.fas.harvard.edu and follow me at Schoolyard Scientists on Instagram, Facebook, and YouTube. If you are one of our schoolyard teachers and would like to be featured in a future episode, please reach out. I want to do an episode about each of you. If you are a human, go for a walk today. Start noticing what is around you. What is growing, singing, blooming? Keep doing that. Write it down. You'll be amazed. This episode was written and produced by me, Katherine Hinkle. Intro and outro music by One Man Book.
That's okay. I'm sorry. I'll just start talking, interrupt me, and then we can cut that awkward part out. No problem.